I'll just introduce our moderator, Dr. Chad Pilcher. He grew up in Illinois and received his bachelor's and master's from the University of Illinois. He then joined the Applied Swine Nutrition Group here at Iowa State and received his PhD under Dr. John Patience, and quite honestly, saved me from a lot of anxiety attacks during grad school. And then upon graduation, he joined Cargill as a swine nutritionist, where he is still today. Chad and his wife, Amy, reside on a hobby farm in Monticello, Illinois, with his two daughters, Abby and Emily. So, Chad, it's all yours.
Thank you, Emily. All right, so for this panel discussion, we're going to have a little bit different format than the previous two. So we're going to have each of the speakers come up, provide a 5 to 7 minute type presentation, and then kind of move on to our discussion. So I'm going to pull up the slides here. Let's see if I can. And we're going to start off with Dr. Laura Greiner, who many of you know here at an assistant professor here at Iowa State University.
Thanks, Chad. Okay, so I'm going to kind of lead into the discussion a little bit today and cue us up, and then turn it over to Dr. Kit and Ben. But where we're going to start today is really the discussion is going to be around raising pigs without antibiotics, but we're also want to talk about other technologies. So we want to make sure the panel is open. We can talk about ractopamine alternatives and so forth. So this is not just going to be limited to feeding without antibiotics. So as I was thinking about this conversation, it really became, how did we get here? Why are we here talking about this today? I don't think there's anything new or unusual here. Certainly when we talk about human health, we're concerned about antibiotic resistance. And so, of course, VFDs and so forth have made their way into the U.S. regulations to try to monitor and control our usage. But certainly environmental sustainability, certainly what we're seeing in Europe with mineral levels in soil and natural resource conservation are always going to be key. And so, of course, that's going to lead into some of the discussion we have today. And then, of course, consumer input, as we have seen with ractopamine and even animal welfare, has made its way into this discussion today to get us to where we're at. So how do we respond? You know, I think the first thing we've all said is, okay, we'll take the antibiotics out, but what does that really mean? So we have to first respond with making sure we're clear on what this definition means. Is it never ever? Is it after the pigs are weaned? We need to make sure that as we go forward, that's something that's very clear to us in the industry, is how are we going to define antibiotic-free? As we're going to do today, we're going to learn from others. So we'll have some people who are practicing it in the field and have been practicing it successfully visit with us about some of the things that they've been doing. Certainly we can review the literature, but lastly, I think it's important to understand the cost and the value. So this is going to vary by system. You know, everybody has a different economic model, and so what works for one person isn't going to work for somebody else. When we think about antibiotic-free programs, I think a lot of us have been very hesitant in the past. Myself, I know when I've taken antibiotics out of the nursery, I've seen a reduced growth rate by about 1 kilo over a 6-week period of time. When we listen to some other people talk in the past, we've heard estimates of $5 to $11 lost per pig. And we understand that when we go to an antibiotic-free program, we have to have two markets. Of course, the antibiotic-free group, and then the group that does receive therapeutic intervention at some point during their lifetime. However, one of the things that I think we can bring to you today with the panel is there's some discussion and there's newer data that suggests that not all antibiotic-free programs are costly. Myself, I've done studies in the past where the antibiotic-free pigs perform just as well as the traditional fed pigs with antibiotics early in their lifetime. So we're going to hear some of that discussion today as well. Other technologies I put up there, of course, was Paline, which is something that I think we all have recognized. So I just wanted to run through a simple scenario here of kind of the thought process of what do we do and what do we prepare for. So what happens when we take antibiotics out of the nursery? We're concerned about a multiple series of events that occurs. Potential diarrhea in the pigs, infection, the decreased production weight that I just alluded to, reduced water and feed consumption, and then, of course, susceptibility to stress and disease. So I think when we talk about taking that technology out of the nursery, as nutritionists, those are probably the common things we think about as what could be potential impactful to the pigs and the producers bottom line. So what do? Well, I just picked diarrhea, okay? I'm not going to go through all of the scenarios, but let's just say diarrhea is the common concern we have if we're going to take antibiotics out of the nursery. Here's just a very quick and short list of some things that you might try. Prebiotics or probiotics. Ingest your ingredients so that you're using different fiber sources such as oats or rice hulls. Change your lactose percent. Work with zinc or copper, as Nick alluded to, or try organic acids. Right, this is not an all-inclusive list, but as nutritionists, these are the first things we're going to run to and start thinking about if somebody approaches us. However, what I want to challenge you with today is we need to maybe start thinking a little bit more outside the box. So Steve's going to do a great job of going through what our current nutrition technologies are, but I'm going to ask you to think a little bit differently. So we're going to think first about genetic selection of parents that have high survivability rates in the expected environment that we're placing them in. We're looking for immunological diversity and function. So this is not nutrition, but this is selecting the animal that's going to be more appropriate for the environment that we're putting them in. And we need to understand the maternal influence to disease management. So this is some work down below here that we've recently finished in our office, funded by the Iowa Pork Producers Association, where we're trying to understand the microbiome differences between gilts and sows, because we know that the piglets that come from gilt litters have a higher mortality rate and they're more susceptible to disease. And one of the things that we have found is that there is a shift in an organism called Clostridium sensostricto 1. And what's interesting about this organism is that we find that pigs that are born as IUGR pigs, they have a decreased level of Clostridium sensostricto 1, and they actually have reduced harvest weights. And if we look at some of the data that we have here, we can see that in gilts, we have a lower level of Clostridium senso 1. So does that mean that's part of the reason why our piglets that come from those litters are slower growing and not as thrifty by the time they get to market? The other one I want you to think about is an organism called Ruminococcus 2. And Ruminococcus 2, with some work that's been done by Dr. Maria Peters in Minnesota and her group, has actually shown that if an animal has a higher level of a Ruminococcus 2 in their gut, they have reduced lung lesions when they are exposed to Mycoplasma pneumonia. And in the research that we were doing, we found that the gilts actually had a higher level of Ruminococcus 2. Now, it wouldn't surprise you if we told you that this herd was going through a mycoplasma break, but that it is interesting that our naive animals have a higher level, so there's a higher rate of protection. So when we think about the discussion yesterday with fiber and how we can manipulate the microbiome, we might need to go farther back in the animal to prepare ourselves to run an antibiotic-free program. So back to this with practices in the field, there's lots of other things we can do, and Ben's going to allude to those shortly. So where do we go? We're going to focus, of course, on science-based approaches and decisions. Research has to continue. Nick's doing some wonderful work helping us understand that not all diseases are going to be treated the same. And that is the challenge we're going to have going antibiotic-free. We have to learn that one size does not fit all. And we need to recognize that it's going to be a concerted effort with the veterinarians, nutritionists, production managers, and caregivers. And we'll focus in on some of those key traits here with a little bit. That's all I have, Chad.
Next up is Dr. Steve Kitt. He's a nutrition production
consultant with First Choice Livestock.
Thank you. I thought I'd start with, I'm getting old, so the question in my head was when I was asked to talk a little bit about this topic, and I'm clearly not going to bring answers today, and I can guarantee you there are people in this room that feed more either non-zinc like Dr. Coma or non-ABF, NAE type pigs than I do today. So I'm not going to bring absolute answers, but I got to thinking about, okay, I've always been really intrigued by health by nutrition interactions, and when was kind of my first experience that I believed them to be real. So I'm dating myself a little bit, but in my PhD work, looked at glutamine and the interaction see if I can figure, yeah, there we go. So basically what we did, we used an LPS challenge, an E. coli LPS challenge. Many would say, hey, that's not a great model, but that's what we used. And looked at feeding, these were all synthetic diets, so all 10 essential amino acids, plus we added some what we considered as non-essentials in some of these treatments. So these were cornstarch plus 10 essential amino acids added to these diets, and 7 days post-wean, we gave an LPS challenge. And so as you can see, in the red bars are those that were fed glutamine, and in the green bars, those that were fed two other non-essential amino acids at the same nitrogen level in the diet. And so as you can see, post the LPS challenge, and this was 7 days post-wean, we were able to basically recover the growth and maintain the feed intake of those pigs. So I think there are, at least proved to me for the first time, firsthand experience, that there are nutrition by health interactions, much of which we've talked about today, that these things, there are some things that can be beneficial. Part of that work was trying to look at how do we formulate around that as well. And as you know, probably through the HPLC process, glutamine is essentially becomes glutamate, and it's hard to differentiate that. That goes back to some of the formulation discussions we've had today too, to how do we build tables and that sort of thing. And there were a few ingredients we were able to define the glutamine content, and I think plasma, fish meal, and maybe a couple other ingredients. But if you don't have all of them, that's a little hard with new ingredients to be able to formulate around that. The other thing, these have all, Wes Schweer and Nick Gabler were sanctioned many years ago. I don't think Nick talked about this exactly, but I thought it was a great literature review of several different things that their relative response to AGPs or antibiotics, so basically alternatives, that they did a really nice lit review. Hundreds, maybe even thousands of papers cited in the literature, and basically, I believe in these graphs, anything that is kind of in orange was a relative, were positive, were deemed positive. And so, as you can look across these different categories of ingredients, if that's the way to say it, that there's variability certainly as it relates to growth rate. And probably what a lot of us are interested in, and the big driver of cost of production is mortality. As it relates to mortality, again in the orange are those that positively influenced the outcome. Not a great hit rate, maybe a little bit on a couple of these, but there are some potential benefits or at least, upwards of some of these of 40% of the time can have an improvement in growth rate. Is that adequate for us or not? I guess it really depends on the cost and the input of these things. So these are listed here because it's a little difficult. Apologize for the size of that slide. But the list here are probiotics, prebiotics, oligosaccharides, organic acids, botanicals, yeast, starch, fiber, copper, and zinc. Of course, zinc is on the hit list, already banned in Europe, as has been discussed. Lysozyme, I think, is an interesting one. Others not listed in that lit review that probably a lot of them, most of these have been talked about. Proteins and bioactive peptides, functional amino acids, like I just mentioned, glutamine, amongst others, tryptophan maybe. In the literature, a little bit of literature review, clay minerals have been mentioned. One thing that hasn't been mentioned, I don't think yesterday or today, was potential for maybe some hyperimmunized egg. That was pretty popular 10, 15 years ago. We've already talked about these. Maybe some enzymes to help improve digestibility. I'm intrigued about, I don't even understand them, but bacteriophages. And then I think fortification considerations that have been talked about quite a bit with Dr. Koma and others. And so I think the real questions that we're all struggling with, right, being kind of Captain Obvious here, but is what's the repeatability of these things? But I would also challenge, what are the repeatability of antibiotics? We kind of all sit here and assume that repeatability of antibiotics are 100%, and I can tell you that's not the case. I don't believe that to be the case, at least. I don't know that exact response. I think it's contingent upon the disease state in which we're trying to combat. So I think we have to kind of remind ourselves that antibiotics probably are not 100%. What should we accept for alternatives to antibiotics? The other question I would throw out is I think we assume zinc and copper are 100% repeatable. If you go back to Nick Gabler's work, and Wes Schweer probably did the heavy lifting in that review, is my guess, 44%. And so, you know, you kind of gotta remember where the gold standard is when we kind of review some of these things as well. The other question I get asked all the time with customers is, okay, so we may be looking at more than one or two things, and even if you did a trial on compound A and compound B to say, hey, did these things work? Then the question becomes, what if I added both of these together? Well, we don't have enough typically experimental units to answer all those questions, but I think we all need to be thinking about how do we collaborate to understand the potential stacking effect of some of these things, and that goes back to Dr. Cuomo's talk about maybe looking at the mode of action. And then through these type of programs is how do we build a very robust and thriving program, and I think that goes back to who's involved, and it can't just be hung on the veterinarian or nutritionist, and I think Ben will address that there's a lot of these type of things that get taken away, these tools that get taken away from us, really the people in the barns taking care of pigs, making sure ventilation's right, feed's right, water delivery, and caretaking of the animals is a big piece of that program. The other thing I'd ask is, which of these are fads versus here to stay? Because if we go spend a lot of time on research and those sorts of things, is all of that for naught in 5 years, and has the consumer changed their mind? So these are just a laundry list of things that I think as we get tools taken away from us, I say NAE and ABF, but it could be lack of zinc oxide. We have to understand the cost of production, and there's a lot of things, as everybody in this room knows, that go into cost of production. One of the things I'd point out that probably I don't think has been talked about a whole lot, but the percent of animals that don't hit this program, and we've got to consider when those go to a commercial market in which there's no maybe a reduced revenue from those animals, how does that hit that? And I think the other thing that I've often been told is that, and it sounds like Ben will talk about this, but that if we put more and more into our program, does that we probably pick the best growers in the best situation for that, but as we put more and more into the system, into the program, does the cost increase because we've simply hurt ourselves in terms of the ability to increase the number of flows going in, and maybe some of our worst growers, then the cost of production goes up. Aaron Gaines actually, I think, reviewed this at Lehman Conference a few years ago. Their estimates, I think, were the cost of production could be upwards to 14 to 21%. And again, I think he really hit the nail on the head. A quote from one of his slides was, "This is something the veterinarian and nutritionist will not figure out by themselves." And so it's going to take everybody. We talked a lot about gut health. The thing I find really fascinating and I think really novel was Megan Niederwarner's work. The fact that she could take a fecal microbial transplant. It's easier for me to say a dung dose, so if I could just use that word, but basically took bugs from a healthy animal and put that into pigs, and then challenged those pigs with a PRRS and a circle virus model, and those that got the bugs from a healthy animal prior to that disease state that had a much greater survivability, somewhere in that 80% survivability. Those that were control had something like a 30% survivability. I had the opportunity to participate on a probiotic in which we had a similar type model where we showed an improvement in mortality. This paper's been published. Another paper that hasn't been published we weren't able to repeat the survivability, but showed improvement in lung lesion scores. And so I think there's some things we can do from a respiratory health standpoint, because it feels like the whole industry is focused on gut health. Clearly, respiratory health, PRRS, is our number one issue. And so that might be an area we need to be thinking about. Another area that I've done some reading on that I think is really interesting is this whole idea of biofilms. And there's a really good recent paper out talking about what are biofilms and how are they built, and a lot of carbohydrate structure. And it gets way above my head, but my understanding is that bacterial species can sit within that carbohydrate structure on plastics and concrete and those sort of things. And they did a really deep dive in the literature. In the three things that came out on top that can impact that biofilm are detergent, temperature, and I say time, but it was washing time. And so those are three things, maybe three take-homes that we can think about. A case study in not all that long ago in my career where we had absolutely brand new nurseries, and we thought these new nurseries were kind of going to be our lifesaver. What happened over time, this is the exact same pig flows and barns. Over time, we started seeing an extreme uptick of mortality, and asked ourselves what in the world is going on. And the ultimate find was an industrial detergent, essentially, to be able to take down presumably that biofilm. And this was the mortality, kind of the before and after the detergent use. So I think there's some in the barn things that we can do clearly outside of the nutritionist wheelhouse as well. We get into hygiene. So barn hygiene, as I was putting these slides together, I thought it'd be a find I've stumbled across that I thought I'd share in the room, maybe a take home. May or may not have to do with specific, with bacteria per se, but typically a lot of us have used whitewash. Whitewash is, to eliminate PDV in the environment. I've stumbled into twice now where clients were using limestone in that mix. Clearly not doing a lot, right? The whole idea is to get the pH down and for it to dehydrate or to kill anything with a low pH. And so a friendly reminder to ask your people that are doing this, is this hydrated lime or some other form of calcium? That's really all I have, other than a strong reminder that it's going to take more than nutritionists and veterinarians to meet the needs of what we're being asked to do with less tools in our toolbox. And that's clearly management is going to play a big role in that, I believe. Certainly suppliers in the room can help us with this. Research institutions, Nick mentioned that livability is hard to capture in the university system, and absolutely, I think there's a lot of production systems that would love to collaborate with university people that could help, that we can quantify the mortality piece as it relates to some of these things. The other thing I would throw out too is, I don't know if there's any meat sales folks or packers in the room, but I've been around sales folks long enough in my career, and they say they need this to go sell it. And have we become kind of the lemmings where we all, once one person says we can meet the needs of antibiotics, seems like all packers run that way, and then everything becomes a commodity and there's no premium in that. That's a challenge. I don't know if that's the case. I've never lived in that world, but it feels that way. And I hate, I'm kind of an anti-government person, so I hate to put this up there, but I really do believe the government has to help us, like Laura said, define some of these terms so that we're all playing on the same playing field. What is NAE? What is ABF? That's all I've got. Thanks.
Thank you. And next up, we have Mr. Ben Keeble. He's a Vice President of U.S. Production at Sunterra Farms.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to approach this from a purely practical point of view. There we go. Thanks, Chad. what Sentara's experiences were and how we are successful in rearing pigs without antibiotics. First of all, in chatting to Chad and to John, I'm just going to give you a little bit of a brief history of Sentara Farms, and that may set the stage for why perhaps we were invited to sit on this panel today. So we were formerly known as PI Canada, Pig Improvement Canada, and Pig Improvement Canada was a partnership between the Price family, who today owns Sentara Farms, and also these three gentlemen here. They've got Howard Fredine, a well-known geneticist in Alberta at the time, Dr. Jack Greenway, who was a veterinarian, and some of you may know this gent in the bottom left-hand corner. It's Ken Woolley, who was founder of PIC. So from the early 70s through to the late 90s, PI Canada promoted the PIC brand across Canada. In 1996, Sentara Farms was founded, and this was after the genetic rights were sold back to PIC International. And Stan and Flo Price set about the business of putting together the full farm-to-plate story that Sentara Farms is so well known for in Canada today. Today we have about 15,000 sows in Alberta. We have a plant that kills 6,000 pigs a week, and most of that product goes to Japan fresh. We also have a curing and cutting plant that produces salami and other products, ham as well for the local markets. And we farm about 6,000 acres. Doug Price has a fairly large cattle enterprise and also ranches about 50,000 acres. So to complete that full farm-to-plate story, we opened our first store in Calgary in 1996. And today we have 11 locations, a mix of full retail, bistro, restaurant, food court, downtown, and urban locations spread between Calgary and Edmonton. So what do we do down here? Well, we're regarded as the management division of Sentara Farms, the Nursery Grow Finish management division of Sentara Farms. We receive 500,000 pigs a year from our Canadian sow barns, and all those pigs go into a traditional contract nursery grow finish system in South Dakota today. Originally, it went into Northwest Iowa, and over the last sort of 5 to 6 years, we've transferred all that production out to South Dakota, and I'll go into that a little bit later on. All those pigs are targeted at the NAE Tyson program, NAE meaning no antibiotics ever, and all those pigs without exception, sorry. Sentara also manages pigs for other customers, and this year we'll probably put through about finish about 1.3 million pigs, of which 600,000 to 700,000 of those pigs will be reared without antibiotics. Excuse me. So back to the business of rearing pigs without antibiotics. So, when we originally went into this and embarked on this project, we had to establish a goal. And the goal we set ourselves was to produce as many full value pigs as possible out of the door at a balanced cost of production. A full value pig to us is an NAE pig, or a pig that's raised without antibiotics. So all parts of the production chain really had to pull together and had to be invested in this, and this includes the sow team all the way through to the program administrators. I've slipped in their feed suppliers. They are a critical part of raising pigs without antibiotics. All of us agree, or did agree when going into this, that animal welfare would not be compromised in any way whatsoever. Diseased and infected pigs would be treated with antibiotics, identified, separated, and sent to a different market. So our objective in our program that we're in today is to raise pigs from birth to market that had never seen hormones, steroids, antibiotics, or animal byproducts. So, initially, what were the priorities of the sow team? Well, I'm not going to go into the fact that we had to renovate 6 sow barns and put in loose housing. That's a totally different subject for another day and presented many challenges. What we really had to do was to focus in on wean pig quality with as low variation as possible. So the 3 things that we started to look at initially for low variation were obviously to manage the gilt flow in conjunction with wean sow numbers and also in conjunction with farrow and crepe management. To gain quality pigs, we really had to focus in also on piglet immunity, colostrum management, feedback protocols, iron status. We measure hemoglobin levels on arrival in nurseries. We have a targeted vaccine program that we continually review, update, and change. So the objective, as the previous speaker mentioned, is to maintain high health in our sow barns. Our target is to have less than 5% litter scouring at any phase in the suckling process. Variation causes confusion downstream, which causes to higher treat rates. Our target is 3% treated coming out of the sow barns. Right, with regard to the nursery grow finish, although we recognize that we were receiving high quality pigs or about to receive high quality pigs, we still also recognize that the weaning process is a stressful event. It doesn't matter the quality of the pig. You guys all know that there's maternal separation. In our case, there's a transportation stresses which are pretty intense, and then we have diet changes onto NAE programs, and also the worry of actually introducing pathogens. So to mitigate those, the Grow Finish division here in the US started to look very carefully at finding a secure location. As you can see from this map here, northwest Iowa, where we previously were, isn't the place to rear pigs, to raise pigs without antibiotics. So over a period of time, we moved our flow, as I've mentioned, into South Dakota. We had to standardize the facility design to fit the flows, and also the design of the equipment and the internal design, so that we have same size pens, same size feeders, same ventilation package. All this leading to ease of training and also setting up practical protocols that can be followed and audited. The focus really was to give people and give staff time to focus in on individual pig care. I can honestly say today that we actually treat more pigs with antibiotics correctly than we ever have done before. Ongoing diagnostics is really important for the health team to make decisions, and obviously the big one here is the nutritional package, veg diets, high quality ingredients with the correct formulations to maintain performance targets. Fact-based communication is always essential. You can see here we have some trends from 2014 to 2019. You can see in the nurseries on the top line, we stopped feeding antimicrobials sort of in 2016, and we did the same in the finishes in 2000 leading into 2017. And you can see by the trend of mortality that in the middle there in 2016, we trended up in both nurseries and finishes. And as we developed our program that I've just been through and the way that we manage pigs, we managed to get things back under control. You can see here's some treat rates. If you look here, our nursery treat rates were between 2 and 5%. That's the number of treated pigs coming in from the sow barns. Our end treat rate at the end of the turn from wean to finish averaged between 11 and 15%. Here's our total mortalities, and you can see that we were achieving roughly 82%, around 80% of pigs placed were hitting the NAE market. So remember that goal that I spelt out right at the beginning. The goal was to get 85% of full value pigs out the door. In other words, pigs raised without antibiotics going into the NAE program. And you can see in 2019 we achieved this and some. Finally, data measurement is absolutely critical to what we're doing. It has to be concise, and we need to monitor key performance and economic indicators. We also need real-time web-based information. We have to understand how many pigs are on program at any given time, and we also have to understand what the treat rates are on a site-by-site basis. So benchmarking is critical internally within our flows. It's also helpful to have others to benchmark against. And then finally, in our organization, weekly reviews and follow-up is absolutely critical. We have a research barn, and ongoing research is also an important part of raising pigs without antibiotics. Finally, there we go. In the words of Dr. Doug Mcdougall, who's from Southwest Vets, some of you may know him. Doug has looked after our Centera's health program for the last 35 years, if not more. And Doug, as you can see here, Doug's comment is the key to rearing pigs without antibiotics is to really get the big stuff right and to sweat the small stuff. Thank you.
Thank you. And we've got time here to kind of open it up for questions. So I'd ask that if you've got a question, raise your hand. They'll flag you down, and please stand up with the box and ask the question. Anybody want to get us started? All right, seeing none.
Oh, you got it.
Oh, here we go.
Coleman's got one.
Steve Pullman, an old timer, been doing antibiotic-free feeding for some 20 years. And Ben, your numbers were right on our numbers with pass rates. Now the problem that exists, and I want to use the AgriStat numbers to make the point and then turn that into a question. AgriStat relative to the poultry industry says that 50% of the birds are raised NAE. And what would one guess what percent of those 50% are sold in the market? 10%. So in essence, we're creating product that doesn't have a demand on with extra cost. Now we've done the same thing in the pig industry. We have a few tenderloins and a few loins that carry the extra cost of antibiotic-free, and then we don't sell the whole pig, and then we get pushed back. So I'm asking the question, when we look at the system dynamics, I know this is an important topic to us, but at the same time, is not a reality check important here?
Anybody? Go for it.
Well, I'm going to give that a go. Reality check. Yes, I suppose there is a reality check here. I agree. I think the question you're asking, if I interpret it correctly, is how sustainable antibiotic-free production is. Is that correct? In general terms, okay. Well, there's a demand, and we are today, Centera today is in a position to take advantage of that demand and to reap the benefits of the premiums. And so for us, it's really important. We're a company that believes in added value production, okay? And so, we're not going to deviate from that path. It's important to us. And I think the reality check is that I think it's going to carry on. I think there is still going to be demand for antibiotic-free pork.
Maybe just a quick follow-up. How come we're producing 5 times more chicken with that system and only 10%, and only 20% of it being sold? So is the demand really there? The production is outstripping the demand. So in the chicken business, 3-year trend, it clearly says that that's a growing trend. We all hear it on advertisements, everything else, but at the same time, only 20% of what's being produced is being sold with that claim. So you're creating a supply that's not being sold with the features and benefits, and that's really what I'm really trying to ask. It comes with higher cost. Do you really capture the value when you sell only 20% of what you produce?
Yeah, and I think we gotta watch that with caution, right? I think the poultry industry has probably ran a little too far, a little too fast, and I think we have to be careful that we don't overproduce, right? We need to produce the right amount and get premium, correct? So
Well, the premium's gone now, and I've worked a little bit Keith Hayden in the poultry in the last couple of years and changing jobs. It's actually closer to 60% on the last agri-stats. And with the takeover now, with Wayne Farms taking over Sanderson, it is table stakes. You have to be NEA just to sell poultry to be equal. There is no premium. Purdue started it. They got a premium for 18 months. Now it's gone. And so we, as an industry, need to be careful. I fully understand you wanting to go value added. There is a demand out there. But let's not take that choice away for a cheaper product for the other consumers out there. That's the thing we have to be careful of.
Heard that we were going to, any animals that were sick and needed to be treated were going to be pulled out, identified, and go to the other market. It becomes, what is the other market if it's table stakes? And so to me, it feels like the modern day let them eat cake, right? Or those sick animals go to the poor people.
Well, yes.
All right, stop handing those boxes out for Buck.
Well, I think we went into this, Centera went into this thinking that this would only be a short-lived thing because of the pressure on antibiotic usage, okay, that the premium would slowly get eroded, I don't think that's the case today. And the reason it isn't the case today is because it's such a hard thing to do. It really isn't. You've got to be in, as I pointed out, you've got to be in the right location. You've got to have the sow barns in the right location. You've got to have the finish to produce a true antibiotic-free raised pig. The pressures are too great regionally in some areas. So although I sort of agree with the industry concept that is this a good thing? It's there and it's real and there is a market for it. So we are in a position today to take advantage of that market. How long that market lasts, I have no idea. But we certainly believe in antibiotic usage and of diseased and infected pigs. So it's a how can I put this? It's a opportunity that we're taking advantage of today.
To compare and contrast the poultry industry, on one hand, I can see as fair with the pig industry. On the flip side, Ben, I think you're right. I don't know anything about the poultry industry, but my understanding was very little antibiotics were used, and since ionophores are not antibiotics, they're kind of it's a word game, right? Antibiotics and ionophores are their antibiotics, right? And so it probably is a lot more difficult to do it in the pig industry. And so if I had to speculate, I don't know, but if I had to speculate, there's probably going to be less of that supply-demand gap in the pig industry. But I don't know that. But I'd be willing to bet that it is going to be harder in pigs than it ever was in poultry.
Yeah, and I think there are a lot of lessons we can learn from systems that are raising pigs without antibiotics. We go through the laundry list that was presented. You think through all of these production steps that are helping deliver a healthier pig, right? Those are things that we can all learn from. And so, maybe if the group can comment a little bit about what are some of the kind of key factors from a production or nutrition standpoint they think really stand out that can help everyone.
One comment I picked up from Ben was let's cookie cutter our barns and then let's make them caretaker friendly. How many of you are dealing with clients or customers or yourselves that you do not have cookie cutter barns and you walk into scenarios where it's not cookie cutter or caretaker friendly, so that they end up spending more time replacing fans, cleaning feeders, whatever that case may be, maybe swing gates aren't in the right place, whatever the case is, and spending time on taking care of pigs. I thought that was a pretty profound statement.
I think the other thing you learn too is that when you're in that space of antibiotic-free and your caretakers know that, their attention to what they're looking for and how they treat animals becomes different. And I actually noticed that there were fewer treatments in a barn because they were more critical as to what to use and how to use it. And then, of course, we promote how to be a better caretaker. And so for me, one of the things that I've learned is management, right? Shocking the water lines and being kind of forward-thinking rather than proactive. There's a lot of times I feel like in the swine industry we're very proactive, but then a lot of times we're really reactive. And we've got to get out of that mode of reactivity, right? Nick alluded to, having diets ahead of a PRRS break. And it'd be great if we could all predict when disease is going to happen. Sometimes we kind of can if we're following and tracking patterns in barns. So when can we be proactive rather than reactive? And I think even if you're not going to go antibiotic-free, I think those are the lessons that we learn as we go through the process.
Yeah, I think that's right, Laura. I mean, one of the things that we certainly found out in our own system was that our performance actually got better as we rolled into antibiotic-free production. Our mortalities got better. Individual pig care was better, and so it led to it led to a system that was focused in on all the right things for all the right reasons.
One question for you, Ben, is I think several of us have experienced in like ABF, NAE type scenarios where people don't want to tag and treat that pig because they want to give it a chance. There's this push to get more pigs through that system. How do you balance the animal welfare side and do the right thing for that pig at that time, but still push culturally that we want as many through the the NAE system as you can? How do you coach that? How do you build that right critical balance between those two things?
Well, the initial thing is understanding what the treat rates are, and that's why collecting data on a daily basis and analyzing data on a daily basis gives us a good indication of where we're getting offside. In other words, maybe we're over-treating for no good reason, or perhaps we're under-treating a group of pigs that need more treatment. So that's the first thing. We know what our average treat rates are. This doesn't include lateral transmission with some challenges that we see from time to time, but we know where we should be. And so really it's about training the individuals and making sure that there is no fear or there is no worry about treating a pig that needs treating. So pigs that need treating and tagging and separating. And it's as simple as that. So, all our service managers and our managers are we've got a really good team, on the slat level. They've been together for a very long time. They've all gone through the process of actually transitioning from commercial production into antibiotic-free production. So they were all part of that process. They all saw the issues with undertreating initially and were part of the process of putting that right. So I think it's all about training. It's all about buy-in and commitment.
The other thing, too, we'll see as things go on is our technology in the barns is getting better. So, our ventilation systems we now have water intake management programs that can send alerts when water intake goes down. And what's the first thing that happens when a pig gets sick? They stop drinking. And so we see that water intake, we get the alerts, and then hopefully as nutritionists we can step in with a nutritional intervention rather than a therapeutic if you're going to go ABF. But that will be something that I think we'll continue to see as we continue to evaluate what works with our diseases, how we can manage them, and then use the technology that's in the barns, because I understand labor is not something that's easy to come by, and skilled labor is even harder. So we're going to have to rely on some of the other technology to help guide us through that process.
Oh, just a quick question for the group. Could do it one last thing here. What's the current market for the NEA and the ABF today in the U.S. U.S. swine industry? And what was it 2 years ago, and what's it going to be 2 years from now?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think we have a real clear estimate there.
No, I'm afraid I don't have any answers for that. All I do know is that the program we're on has grown.
And with that, we're out of time, but let's thank our panelists and